Farmer sees elderly woman trying to protect her dog from a starving mountain lion. Comment saying what you thought of this story, giving a score from 0 to 10, and comment what city you are watching me from. I really want to know if you liked my story, and I want to get to know you better, so subscribe to my channel to support my work. I count on your help. The silence of the high plains at 5 in the morning has a weight that few people know. I know it. For 12 years, I've been waking up before the sun, walking the same stretch of fence line, checking the cattle with my eyes closed from so much repetition. But on that cold Tuesday in November, when the fog still hugged the timber stands, something was different, and I felt it before I saw it. The barking was desperate, not the routine bark of a hound sniffing out a raccoon. It was the scream of an animal that knows it's going to lose. I quickened my pace and found Martha, a white-haired lady in her 70s, tiny frame, hair pulled back in a bun, with her arms wide open in front of her dog Buster, a yellow mutt trembling against an old wire fence. 30 yards from them, a mountain lion was circling, eyes locked, body low to the ground. Martha wasn't running. She held a walking stick with both hands, her voice cracking as she repeated, "Go away, go away." I acted without thinking. I grabbed the metal gaskin I was carrying for the generator, slammed it against the steel fence post with all my strength, the noise cutting through the fog like a gunshot. The cougar backed off into the brush, but not before brushing Martha's side with its shoulder. The impact was enough to knock her down. Martha fell, hitting her knee on a rock. And that's when I realized the size of the problem. She couldn't get up on her own. I carried Martha to my own place, the closest house for miles. She was in a panic, her eyes unfocused, calling out a name I didn't know. Buster followed us both, still shivering. I didn't know how to take care of people. I knew how to take care of land, of cattle, of broken fences. But there was a frail, elderly woman on my mattress and a dog licking her hand as if that could fix everything. When Martha regained her senses, the first thing she said was, "You're Arthur's boy, aren't you?" I froze. Arthur was my father's name, a man who had passed away 15 years ago, leaving behind debts and silences I never knew how to name. How did this woman know his name? Martha revealed it bit by bit between sips of tea I made with zero skill. She had been the midwife who brought me into the world, and she had made a promise to my father that if she ever needed help, Arthur's family would be there. A promise that was never called in, until now. That revelation shook me to my core, but I didn't have time to process it. Martha needed a doctor, and the main highway was washed out because of the storms that hit the week before. Flooded bridges, deep mud in the prairie dirt. The only way out was an old dirt road that cut through Richard's property. And Richard was the problem. Richard owned the neighboring ranch, 4 times the size of mine, a 50-year-old man with slicked-back gray hair and the smile of someone who has never heard the word no. For 2 years, he had been trying to buy my land for a price that was frankly an insult. I never gave in. Since then, Richard treated every interaction as a chance to prove I was weak, isolated, expendable. When I called asking for passage through his road to take Martha to the clinic, the answer was a long pause, and then, "The road's closed to visitors. Handle your own side." Martha stayed 3 days at the ranch without a doctor. Her knee swelled up. She ran a fever. I improvised with what I had. Ice from the cooler, expired medicine from the town pharmacy that Tyler, a young neighbor, went to get on his dirt bike, taking the long way around, risking the mountain pass. When Tyler got back, he also brought news. Richard had spread the word down the valley that I was hiding a sick old woman without telling her family. The implication was clear and dirty. Martha's family, her daughter Rachel, who lived in the city, heard Richard's twisted version before hearing the truth. Rachel showed up at the ranch, furious, accusing me of kidnapping, of being after her mother's money, of everything Richard had surgically planted in her head. Martha tried to speak, but the fever made her confused. I just stood in the doorway of my own home, listening to accusations I couldn't fight off, because I never learned how to defend myself with words. Rachel took her mother. Buster stayed, because in her delirium, Martha begged me to watch over him. I was left alone with the dog and the stain Richard had spread. Joe, the owner of the local general store, stopped letting me put things on my tab. Nancy, the old superstitious woman who lived a mile down the road, locked her gate when I drove by. In a rural community where your reputation is your currency, Richard had bankrupted me without spending a dime. But I found something while cleaning out the barn, a box of my father's papers. Inside, letters exchanged with Martha over the decades, and among them, the record of a different promise than the one she had told me about. My father had left a land agreement with Martha, a piece of a deed that was never formalized. If that document was valid, I had a legal obligation, and also a shield that Richard didn't know about. I took the papers to the county courthouse. Paul, the county clerk, examined everything with excessive care, asked for time, asked for a filing fee. I paid what I didn't have, and I waited. Buster started acting strange, sniffing the perimeter of the ranch in the dead of night, barking at the timberline where the cougar had appeared. I followed the dog one night and found fresh tracks, but not from a mountain lion. They were boot prints. Someone had been there recently watching my house. The loneliness settled back in, heavy. I sat on the porch with Buster in my lap, looking out at the morning plains. The wind blew through the pasture. The silence was thick, and for the first time in 12 years, I wondered if it was possible for anyone to care. Frank showed up at the fence line one morning in heavy fog, hat in hand. He was an older fella, a man of few words, tired eyes. He had worked as a ranch hand for Richard for over 15 years. He said he just couldn't stay quiet anymore. He had been ordered by Richard to cut my fence and let my cattle loose on a windy night to make it look like the posts just gave out. Frank hadn't done it, but another hand had done something similar, tossing animal carcasses near my property line to draw that mountain lion back. The cruelty wasn't random, it was calculated. Richard wanted me to crumble from the inside out, piece by piece, until selling the land felt like the only sane way out. I felt the ground give way. Not the dirt beneath my boots, but that internal foundation a man builds after years of silence and isolation. For the first time in 12 years, I cried, alone with Buster leaning against my leg, in the dark of the barn. It was Tara, Tyler's wife, who found me like that. She had come to drop off some hot food, like she'd been doing quietly ever since this whole mess started. Tara was a woman of few words and precise actions, and she was the one who said, "You've got the papers, you've got Frank, and you've got Martha. What more do you need?" Those words just kept echoing. I'd spent so much time alone that I had forgotten there were people willing to stand by my side, not out of obligation, but because it was the right thing to do. The following week, Paul called me down to the courthouse. The documents were solid. More than that, he had found out that Richard had tried to register that exact same parcel of land in his own name months prior, a move that, with my papers now filed, amounted to an illegal land grab. Paul was a law and order man. He didn't like making a fuss, but there was a hard edge to his voice when he said, "This isn't an oversight, it's a felony." There was no showdown in the town square, no yelling match. Richard got served the papers by a sheriff's deputy while drinking his morning coffee on his front porch, and right then and there, the empire of control he had spent years building collapsed in administrative silence. Days later, Richard fell ill. Neighbors said it was stress. Stella, the town nurse, diagnosed a knee infection, caused, according to her, by a bad fall he took all by himself on the steps of his own big house. The same knee, the same kind of swelling, the exact same 3 nights of fever that Martha had suffered through. The whole community heard about it. Nobody said a word out loud. But Nancy unlocked her gate again when I drove by. Joe started writing on my tab again, and when I walked into the general store, he tossed a bag of coffee into my groceries without ringing it up. He just said, "We're square." I drove back to the ranch that afternoon with a lighter heart than I'd felt in a long, long time. Buster ran ahead of me, nose in the wind. The prairie was quiet. The fog had lifted, and for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't weigh me down. But the story wasn't over. Martha came back 3 days later. Rachel was with her. The two of them stepped out of the car slowly, like folks walking into church. Martha was holding a cloth bundle in her hands. Buster barked, but it was a happy bark. He ran right up to her, jumped, and licked her hands like he'd been waiting his whole life for that exact moment. Rachel walked up to me. Her eyes were red. She said, "I was wrong. I believed the wrong man, and I almost ruined the right one." I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. She kept going. "My mom told me everything. The papers, the promise, what you did for her. And I came to apologize." Martha stepped up too. She unwrapped the cloth bundle. Inside there was a stack of old photographs, letters, and a silver locket. She said, "This belonged to your dad. He gave it to me when you were born. He told me that if you ever needed to know who he really was, I should show you this." I took the locket. Inside was a picture and a handwritten note. So he knows he was never alone. My father had left me more than just debts. He had left me promises kept in the dark, ties I never knew existed, and a safety net that only caught me when I was falling. Martha stayed another week at the ranch, not because she was hurt this time, but because she wanted to. Rachel went back to the city, but promised she'd come visit. And Buster, well, Buster stayed right where he always belonged. One morning, Martha and I were sitting out on the porch when she asked, "Do you know why that cougar never came back?" I shook my head. She smiled. "Because it already had what it needed. It wasn't hunger, it was fear. And when you hit that fence post, you proved that there was something out here stronger than its fear." I chewed on that for a while. The mountain lion was scared, Richard was scared, I was scared, we were all scared of something. The difference was what we did with that fear. Martha headed out at the end of the week, but before she left, she told me to keep Buster for another month. She said, "A good dog shouldn't be alone, and it looks like a good rancher shouldn't either." I stood out on the porch for a lot longer than I usually do. Buster sniffed the breeze. The prairie was quiet, and for the first time in 12 years, that silence didn't feel so heavy. The month Martha let me keep Buster flew by way too fast. The dog had just become part of the rhythm of the place. He woke up with me before the sun, shadowed my steps along the fence line, and laid out on the porch while I fixed whatever was broken. But something shifted in him those last couple of weeks. Buster started getting restless at dusk, sniffing the air real hard, staring off into the timber like he was waiting for something. On a cold Wednesday in December, when the prairie wind cuts right to the bone, Buster went missing. I looked for him all morning. I called, I whistled, I tracked footprints that just vanished into the thick brush. Nothing. As the sun started to drop, the guilt settled heavy in my chest. Martha had trusted me with her dog, and I let her down. It was Tyler who found me down by the creek bed just as it was getting dark. He said he'd spotted Buster running toward the old abandoned homestead about 2 miles out. Nobody had set foot on that property in years. The farmhouse was caving in. The weeds were chest high, and folks always told stories about people wandering into those woods and getting lost. I grabbed my flashlight and headed out. It was a long trek. The cold wind carried the smell of damp earth and dead leaves. The moon was high by the time I reached the old property. The house was just a skeleton of rotted wood and busted shingles. I hollered for Buster. Nothing. I stepped through what was left of the front gate. That's when I heard the bark. It wasn't a scared yelp, it was a warning bark. I followed the sound around to the back, to a crumbling old barn. The door was cracked open. I pushed it slow, my flashlight beam cutting through the black. Buster was in there, but he wasn't alone. Huddled up in the corner, shaking and wide-eyed, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. Her clothes were filthy, her hair was a mess, and her bare feet were covered in dirt and scratches. Buster was sitting dead center in front of her like a guard dog. The girl shrank back when the light hit her. I raised my hands up slow, same way I do with a spooked colt. I said real quiet, "It's okay. I ain't gonna hurt you." She didn't say a word. She just looked at Buster like she was asking for his permission and sat right back down. It was his way of saying, "She's with me." I sat down in the dirt, keeping my distance. I asked her name. Silence. I asked if she was hungry. She gave a tiny, barely there nod. I pulled a sandwich out of my pack that I'd brought for the hike and held it out. She took it slow, eating with shaky hands, never taking her eyes off me. It took me the better part of an hour to find out her name was Lily. She had run away from home. She wouldn't say why, but the way she flinched and hunched her shoulders when I asked about her folks told me everything I needed to know. She'd been hiding out there for 2 days. Buster had found her the night before and hadn't left her side since. I didn't push her. I told her in the freezing cold that she needed help. Lily looked at Buster again. The dog stood up, trotted over to me, then walked back to her. That was all the convincing she needed. The 3 of us walked back to my ranch, the little girl staying right between me and Buster, quiet the whole way. Soon as we got in, I heated up some soup, got her some heavy blankets, and let her sleep in the room Martha had used. Buster curled up right in the doorway, standing watch. First thing the next morning, I drove into town. I tracked down Stella, the nurse. She knew Lily's family. Her real daddy had passed away the year prior, her mama had remarried, and the stepdad was a man with heavy hands and mean words. Lily had been missing for 3 days. Her mama was out looking for her, but was too scared to go to the cops, terrified it would just make things worse at home. Stella drove out to the ranch that afternoon. She sat down and talked with Lily privately for almost an hour. When she walked out of that room, her eyes were shining with tears. She just looked at me and said, "She can't go back to that house. Not yet." For the next few days, my quiet little ranch turned into a safe house. Rachel drove up from the city, bringing clothes and some old toys that her daughter used to play with. Tara came by to help cook, to brush the tangles out of Lily's hair, doing all those soft things I just didn't know how to do. And Buster never left that little girl's side. It was Martha who finally brought the fix. She drove up from town a week later with the news. She had sat down with Lily's mama, got the child protective folks involved, found the right people who could actually do something. The mama had finally found her backbone, kicked the husband out, and asked for the law's help. She wanted her little girl back, but she wanted her safe. She wanted it done right. Lily stayed at the ranch for another 10 days while everything got sorted out. In that time, she started talking again, started smiling, started acting like a kid again. And me, the guy who had spent 12 years completely alone, I learned that a home isn't just a place. It's the people. It's the ties that bind. It's a hound dog sleeping in the doorway and a little girl laughing on the front porch. The day Lily finally left, she hugged me tighter than a vice. She whispered, "Thanks for not sending me away." I couldn't even choke out a response. I just hugged her back. Buster walked her all the way to her mama's car, wagging his tail, and gave her hand one last lick. When the dust settled behind their car on the dirt road, the dog walked right back up onto the porch and dropped his head on my boot. Martha stuck around a bit longer. She said, "You saved that little girl, but I reckon she saved you too." Maybe she was right, because that night, sitting out on the porch with Buster, looking out over the quiet prairie, I realized that the loneliness was gone for good. Fall rolled into the plains, bringing that dry wind that kicks up the red dust and makes all the old gates groan. Buster had officially been at the ranch for 3 months. Martha had gone back to the city, but she drove out every single week, bringing baked goods and just sitting out on the porch, shooting the breeze about simple stuff. The weather, the harvest, the local gossip. Rachel would tag along sometimes, bringing her little granddaughter, who would chase Buster all over the front yard. The ranch wasn't dead silent anymore, and I sure wasn't alone. But it was on one of those windy afternoons that everything got turned upside down again. I was out mending the north pasture fence when I heard an engine. A shiny car was creeping up my dirt road, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. I wasn't expecting anybody. I dropped my pliers, wiped my hands on my jeans, and just waited. A guy in a crisp, light-colored suit stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase, wearing sunglasses even though the sun was dipping low. Behind him came a woman in high heels that was sinking right into the dirt with every step. I knew the type immediately. City folks, corporate money. The guy introduced himself as Mr. Marcus, an attorney. The woman was Eileen, a real estate broker. They were representing a big development firm out of Denver. They wanted to make an offer on my land. I told them straight up I wasn't looking to sell. Marcus gave me that smug smile lawyers get when they think you just haven't figured it out yet. He said this wasn't like the other offers. He said the firm was planning a high-end ranch resort community, that land values out here were skyrocketing, and that I could walk away with enough cash to buy 3 ranches somewhere else. Eileen popped open her briefcase, showing me glossy brochures and pointing at the numbers. It was a big number, real big. The kind of money that rewrites a man's whole life story. I looked back at my house, at the porch where Martha sat every week, at the yard where Rachel's grandkid played, at Buster, sprawled out in the shade, eyeing the strangers like he didn't trust them one bit. I told them I needed to think on it. Marcus handed me his business card and said they'd be back in a week. They drove off, kicking up that same red dirt. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I sat out on the porch until the early hours, Buster's head resting on my leg. The offer just kept echoing in my skull. It was serious money. It was freedom. It was a golden ticket to start completely over without the ghost of 12 lonely years hanging over my head. But it also felt like giving up. Martha showed up unannounced the very next day. She said she had a dream about me and just knew she had to come check in. She sat down on the porch, took the coffee I poured her, and just sat quiet for a long spell. Then she looked right at me and said, "You're thinking about selling?" She wasn't asking. I just nodded. Martha let out a long sigh. "It's your land, your call. But before you sign anything, you answer me one thing. What exactly are you selling? Is it just dirt, or is it everything you've managed to build out here these last few weeks?" I didn't have an answer for her. She just kept going. Some folks spend their whole lives searching for a place where they belong. You already had that place, and you didn't even know it. It took a mountain lion, a stray dog, and a stubborn old woman for you to finally open your eyes. But you see it now. So the real question is, are you willing to throw all that and open your eyes? But you see it now. So the real question is, are you willing to throw all that away for a paycheck? I sat there dead silent. Martha stood up, patted me on the shoulder, and told me she'd be back next week. She drove off, leaving me carrying the heavy weight of that question. Over the next few days, I had more folks drop by the ranch than I had in the whole 12 years prior. Tara drove up just to drop off a homemade pie. Tyler came out to help me stretch some wire. Frank, who had finally quit working for Richard, stopped by just to see if I needed an extra set of hands with the chores. Even Nancy, the superstitious neighbor, swung by and left a bundle of wild sage tied to my gate, claiming it would keep the bad luck away. It hit me that none of these people were here because they owed me anything. They were here because they wanted to be, because somehow, over the last few crazy weeks, I'd become a real part of this community again, and they had become a part of my life. When Mr. Marcus's shiny car pulled up the following week, I was already waiting on the porch. Buster was right there beside me. Marcus stepped out, flashing that $1 million smile, briefcase in hand, ready to close the deal. I told him I wasn't selling. His smile slipped. He asked if it was about the number, if they needed to sweeten the pot. I told him it had nothing to do with the money. It was about belonging somewhere. It was about finally finding the thing I didn't even know I'd been searching for. Marcus just stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. He snapped his briefcase shut, muttered something about it being a shame, and drove off, shaking his head. Martha rolled up a little while later, almost like she had timed it. She took her spot on the porch, looked at me, and just smiled. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. That evening, I sat in the exact same spot I'd sat 1,000 times over the last 12 years, but felt full of possibilities, full of people who gave a damn, full of ties that no amount of money could ever buy. Buster rested his chin on my knee. The high plains were perfectly still. The wind rolled gently through the grass. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I truly felt at home. Sometimes a man spends his whole life looking for